Cop kicked Steven Seagal in the face, but when Seagal caught his leg, the cop's soul left his body. Steven Seagal wasn't dressed like a movie star today. No sunglasses, no long coat, no security. Just a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and a small grocery bag in his hand as he walked through a quiet Sunday marketplace. The air smelled of roasted corn, barbecue smoke, and street vendor spices. Families chatted, children ran between stalls, and musicians played soft acoustic tunes near the fountain. It was the kind of peaceful place Steven loved, a moment away from cameras, fame, and noise. He paused beside a fruit stand, checking a bunch of grapes when a rough voice cut through the calm. "Hey, you there. Stop." Steven looked up slowly. A police officer was walking toward him with heavy boots and an expression carved from suspicion. People nearby turned their heads, sensing tension where none had existed moments earlier. "You buying something, or stealing?" the officer demanded, stepping too close. Steven blinked once, calm as still water. "Just shopping," he replied gently. The officer didn't like that. Something about Steven's steady voice irritated him. "Show me your ID. Empty your pockets too." A few bystanders stiffened. An elderly woman whispered, "Why's he bothering that man?" Steven took a breath, keeping his voice respectful. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to." "Don't talk back," the cop snapped. "You fit the description." He didn't say what description, because there wasn't one. The man had made up his mind the moment he saw Steven's size, confidence, and quiet presence. Steven stayed still, calm, but the muscles in his jaw shifted, just slightly. Not fear. Not anger. Just disappointment. The officer moved closer, chest forward, authority dripping from every gesture. "You hiding something? Answer me." Steven looked him straight in the eye. "I told you, officer. I'm just here to buy groceries." A group of teenagers paused their conversation, phones already sliding from their pockets. This didn't look like a routine check. This looked personal. The atmosphere shifted, the easygoing Sunday vibe replaced by a heavy silence. Steven could feel eyes watching him, waiting, wondering how far this encounter would go. And then, just as the officer reached for his baton, a thought crossed everyone's mind. What Steven did next shocked every single person standing there. The marketplace had fallen strangely quiet. Vendors paused mid-sale, children stopped running, and the guitarist near the fountain lowered his instrument as the officer's hand hovered dangerously close to his baton. Steven Seagal stood in the center of the tension, still holding his small grocery bag, a simple, peaceful man approached by unnecessary hostility. The officer stepped closer until he was nearly chest to chest with Steven. "I said empty your pockets," he repeated, louder, as if volume equaled authority. Steven kept his voice level. "Officer, with all respect, you're making a mistake." "Are you refusing a lawful order?" the cop barked. People around them exchanged nervous glances. One man whispered, "Why's he going after him? The guy's literally just buying fruit." A young mother pulled her child to her side and whispered, "Don't stare, sweetie." But the little boy couldn't help it. No one could. The tension felt magnetic. Steven slowly set the grocery bag down on a nearby bench. His movements were deliberate, slow, open, non-threatening. The officer immediately interpreted the simple gesture as defiance. "Oh, so you think you're smart?" the cop growled. "Not at all," Steven replied calmly. "I'm just quiet." The officer's shout echoed across the marketplace, bouncing off storefronts and halting conversations halfway through. A flock of pigeons fluttered into the air as if even they felt the rising aggression. Steven exhaled softly. He knew where this was heading. He had seen this pattern before, not just as a martial artist, but as a man who had spent decades studying human behavior. Some people didn't recognize calmness as strength. They misread it as weakness, and that made them reckless. A teenager wearing a basketball jersey nudged his friend. "Dude, we should record this." His friend was already lifting his phone. Others followed. Screens lit up like fireflies around them. The officer finally noticed the crowd and snapped, "Everyone back up. This is police business." But no one moved. Not because they wanted trouble, they wanted truth. Something felt off. Everyone could see it. Stephen gently lifted his hands to show he meant no harm. "Officer, I'd be happy to clear this up. I haven't done anything wrong." "Oh, you think you can tell me how to do my job?" His voice cracked with ego and insecurity. Stephen shook his head. "That's not what I'm saying." "What are you saying?" the officer challenged, stepping close enough that Stephen could smell the coffee on his breath mixed with bitterness. "I'm saying, don't move." Phones zoomed in. Gasps rippled through the circle of onlookers. A woman with shopping bags muttered under her breath, "He's just trying to provoke him." "This isn't right." Another man crossed his arms. "This officer's gonna regret messing with that guy. You can tell." The officer circled Stephen now like a predator hunting prey. "Hands behind your back," he ordered. "For what?" Stephen asked quietly. "For resisting." Stephen raised an eyebrow. "I've done nothing of the sort." The cop's face reddened, not from danger, but from embarrassment. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Hey, officer, he's not resisting. Leave him alone." The cop whipped around. "You wanna go to jail too?" Silence swept over the crowd like a sudden wind. He turned back to Stephen. "I'm giving you one more chance." Stephen could feel the crowd's fear building. He didn't want children witnessing violence. He didn't want shoppers traumatized. He didn't want the situation to spiral. But he also wasn't going to be bullied into guilt for a crime he didn't commit. "Officer," Stephen said gently, "please think this through." The cop's nostrils flared. He stepped forward and shoved Stephen's shoulder. The push didn't move Stephen an inch. It was like shoving a mountain. The officer blinked, confused. He shoved harder. Stephen didn't budge. Someone in the crowd let out a quiet, stunned laugh. "What the—" the officer muttered beneath his breath. Stephen simply said, "I don't want any trouble." "And yet," the cop snapped, "you're causing it." He reached for his radio, speaking loudly so everyone could hear. "Dispatch, I need backup. Possible hostile suspect." The word hostile made the crowd gasp. Hostile? "He hasn't done anything," someone yelled. Stephen lowered his eyes, sadness flickering across his face. Not fear. Just disappointment at how quickly a simple afternoon had turned into chaos. The officer pointed at Stephen with the tip of his baton. "Last warning. Get on your knees." Stephen looked up slowly. His tone turned firm for the first time. "Officer, I'm not getting on my knees for something I didn't do." That sentence hit the officer like a challenge he wasn't prepared for. He took 3 steps back, adopting a pseudo-fighting stance he clearly didn't understand. The marketplace froze. People weren't breathing. Phones were trembling. The air felt electric. The officer narrowed his eyes and whispered through clenched teeth, "You're gonna regret this." He lunged forward. And in that moment, everyone watching knew. The real story was about to begin. The moment the officer lunged, the crowd collectively inhaled. It wasn't a punch or a kick, more like a reckless charge, fueled by ego rather than training. Stephen stepped aside calmly, letting the officer stumble past him with nothing but air in his grasp. It wasn't even a defensive move, it was simply Stephen refusing to be a target. The officer spun around, furious. "Don't you move again." Stephen stood still. "Officer, I didn't." "Shut up." The shout rattled a nearby fruit stand. Apples rolled onto the pavement as the vendor flinched. A young girl near the fountain covered her ears. Tension had been rising, but now it was boiling over. Stephen took a slow breath, grounding himself. He had always believed that the greatest martial artists were the calmest men in the room, not the loudest. But calmness seemed to infuriate this officer even more. Backup still hadn't arrived, which meant the angry man standing before him felt he had full control, full power, or at least the illusion of it. The officer stepped forward until he was inches away. "You think you're some tough guy? You think you're smarter than me?" Stephen shook his head softly. "I'm just trying to avoid a problem." "Avoid this," the cop sneered, giving Stephen a hard shove. Again, Stephen didn't move. Again, the officer was the only one who seemed shaken by the non-response. A murmur ran through the crowd. A man whispered, "Why isn't that officer backing off?" A woman recorded with trembling hands, "This is unbelievable. He's targeting him for no reason." The cop's jaw twitched. He grabbed Stephen's wrist, attempting to twist it into a compliance hold. Stephen didn't resist, but he also didn't collapse or cry out. His wrist simply didn't move. The officer grunted, confused. He used both hands, trying to force Stephen down. But Stephen remained upright, rooted, calm. "Why won't you go down?" the officer yelled, pulling harder. Stephen finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Officer, you're going to hurt yourself. I said down." The cop reached for his baton again. Stephen gently pulled his arm away, not violently, just enough to free himself. But the small motion made the cop lose balance. He stumbled backward, catching himself on a metal bench. The crowd gasped. He scrambled upright, humiliated. Rage replaced confusion. "You're assaulting an officer," he shouted, pointing at Stephen wildly. A chorus erupted from the crowd. "He didn't even touch you. This is ridiculous. You're abusing your authority." The officer ignored them, his face flushed with anger. His radio crackled, backup finally responding, but he slapped it off. He didn't want help. He wanted domination. He turned back toward Stephen, chest heaving. Stephen looked at him with genuine sadness. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, I do," the officer snarled. "You think you're some kind of fighter? Some kind of tough guy? Let's see how tough you are." Stephen didn't move. "Violence isn't the answer." "That's because you know you'll lose," the cop taunted. People in the crowd exchanged looks. Steven Seagal, the man who had trained with masters across continents, lose to an untrained, angry officer? It was absurd. Yet Stephen didn't reveal who he was. He didn't brag. He didn't say a word about his strength, his history, or the skills he possessed. His silence only made the officer angrier. The officer suddenly reached for Stephen's shirt, grabbing it in a tight fist. His voice was a growl. "Last chance. Kneel." Stephen looked down at the hand gripping his shirt. He didn't pry it off, didn't break the grip. He just stared at it calmly. Children in the crowd looked terrified. Adults clenched their teeth. Phones captured every second. Stephen said quietly, "Let go." That tone, it wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it carried weight, the weight of someone who had seen too many fights end badly. The officer's grip tightened instead. Stephen sighed. Not in fear, but in disappointment. He eased back a small step, prompting the officer to stumble again. The cop's foot caught on the edge of the curb, and he nearly fell. Laughter broke out from a few teenagers, and that was the final spark. The officer snapped. He pointed the baton at Stephen. "That's it. You're done." With a roar, he raised the baton high, preparing to swing. Several people screamed. A woman yelled, "Stop!" Someone shouted, "Sir, please don't let him hit you." But Stephen remained perfectly still. The baton froze mid-air. Not because Stephen blocked it. The officer stopped himself, suddenly aware of the dozens of phones recording him. He lowered the baton slowly, but his pride wouldn't allow him to walk away. He needed to reassert dominance. "Fine," he hissed. "If the baton won't teach you a lesson, maybe this will." He took 3 steps back. His stance changed. He lifted one knee. He set his balance. The crowd's reaction was instant. "He's not. No way. He's not actually going to." But he was. The officer was preparing a high kick to Steven Seagal's face, something he had absolutely no skill or training for. Stephen's shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. His eyes sharpened, not in anger, but in readiness. The officer surged forward, legs swinging upward in a wild, sloppy arc. And in that single second before impact, the crowd collectively whispered, "This cop has no idea who he's fighting." Time slowed as the officer's wild high kick arced through the air. It was an untrained strike, sloppy balance, poor form, reckless momentum. Stephen had seen thousands of kicks in his lifetime, from masters in Japan to street fighters in Los Angeles. But he had rarely seen one this uncoordinated. Still, he didn't counter. Not yet. Instead, he simply shifted his weight, prepared to move the moment it became necessary. The officer's foot cut the air like a drunk dancer's leap, nowhere close to professional, but dangerously close to causing chaos. A teenage girl gasped loudly. "He's gonna break his own leg." A man near the fountain muttered, "Somebody stop this idiot." As the kick reached the peak of its poorly aimed climb, Stephen finally raised one arm, not striking, not hitting, simply guiding the incoming leg away like a parent redirecting a child. The officer stumbled forward, landing awkwardly. His boots screeched against the pavement. He caught himself, but barely. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. "What is this guy doing? He's attacking a civilian for nothing. Someone call internal affairs, this is insane." The officer whipped around, breathing heavily, his face red with humiliation. He knew he looked foolish in front of a growing audience, and humiliation can be a dangerous fuel. "You think you're funny?" he snarled at Stephen. Stephen only replied, "Are you all right?" That small question, filled with sincere concern, felt like an insult to the angry officer. His pride was already shattered. Stephen's calmness added salt to the wound. The cop stepped forward again, fists clenched, when suddenly, "Wait! Wait!" a voice called from the crowd. A young man in a green hoodie squeezed through the onlookers, his phone still recording. His eyes went wide as he stared at Stephen's face. "No freaking way," he whispered. Another woman joined, squinting hard. Then her jaw dropped. "Oh my God," she breathed. Is that really him?" More faces began to light up with recognition. It spread through the crowd like electricity. "That's Steven Seagal." "No, is it?" "Yes. Dude, that's Steven Seagal. The martial artist. The action star. The Aikido master." People who once watched in fear now whispered with awe. A middle-aged man whispered, "I grew up watching his movies." A teen added, "Bro could end this fight with one finger if he wanted to." Someone zoomed in on their phone. "Look at his posture. That's definitely him." The officer blinked, confused. He had noticed the shift in the crowd's energy but didn't understand why. "What are you all mumbling about?" he snapped. The man in the green hoodie spoke louder, addressing the officer directly. "Sir, do you know who you're trying to fight?" The officer scoffed. "I don't care if he's the president. He follows my orders." A ripple of awkward laughter went through the crowd. Not humorous laughter, the kind people make when someone has no idea how stupid they look. Stephen remained motionless, saying nothing. He never bragged about his reputation, never flaunted his abilities. His whole life had been built on discipline, not ego. But the crowd wasn't letting this go. One woman called out, "Officer, that man is a world-famous martial arts expert." Another added, "He's trained military guys, special forces, law enforcement." Someone shouted, "You're trying to fight Steven Seagal, bro." Phones rose higher. Faces filled with anticipation. Everyone knew what could happen if the officer pushed things further. Everyone except the officer himself. He squinted at Stephen, stepping closer. "Who the hell is Steven Seagal?" he asked sarcastically. The crowd gasped. Not because he didn't know, but because he said it with such disrespect, such foolish confidence. A teenager muttered, "This man about to learn today." The officer continued, oblivious. "You think just because these people know your name, you can ignore MY authority?" Stephen spoke quietly. "This isn't about authority. It's about fairness." "Fairness?" the officer barked. "I decide what's fair." The arrogance hit the crowd like a slap. A woman yelled back, "No you don't. The law does." Another voice added, "You're abusing your power." Phones caught every angle now. More people gathered from nearby shops. Store employees stepped outside, drawn by the growing storm. Still, Stephen didn't reveal his identity. He didn't say, "Yes, I'm Steven Seagal." He didn't say, "I'm trained." Nor did he say, "You're making a mistake." He simply stood with humility, refusing to weaponize his fame. But the officer took his silence as defiance. "You think hiding behind fans will save you," he growled. Let's see how tough you really are." He spread his feet, tightened his fists, and locked eyes with Stephen. The man in the green hoodie whispered to himself, "Oh no, he's gonna try again." Stephen's expression shifted, but only slightly. Not anger, not fear, just a quiet acceptance. The officer didn't know who he was dealing with, but he was about to find out, the hard way. And the crowd could feel it coming. The officer squared his stance like a man who watched a few action movies and believed he understood martial arts. His fists tightened, his ego swelled, and his pride burned hotter with every whisper coming from the crowd. Steven Seagal stood in complete stillness, hands loose at his sides, posture relaxed, not defensive, not aggressive, simply present. His calmness made the officer look even more reckless. A teen whispered, "Bro, he's gonna get folded." A woman replied, "He doesn't even know who he's dealing with." Someone else muttered, "This is gonna go viral." The officer pointed at Stephen angrily. "You think you're better than me, huh? Standing there with that smug, calm face." Stephen answered softly, "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I'm just asking you to stop." The officer scoffed. "Stop? Oh, I'll stop when you're on the ground." His breath was shaking. His pride was bleeding. He needed to assert control, even if it meant making the worst decision of his career. The officer took a deep breath, leaned back, and lifted his leg. The crowd reacted instantly. "Oh no! He's not actually. Somebody stop him." But nobody could. The crowd was frozen. Cameras locked in. A human storm was about to strike. The officer launched his kick, a high, overly ambitious strike aimed directly at Stephen's face. His foot soared upward in an awkward but committed arc, driven more by desperation than technique. In that split second, everything slowed. A mother shielded her child's eyes. A vendor whispered a prayer. The teen recording whispered, "This man's soul is about to leave his body." Stephen didn't blink. His movement was so calm, so precise, that most people didn't even see it happen in real time. One moment the officer's foot was flying toward him, the next, Stephen's hand was already there. Steven Seagal caught the officer's leg. Not with force. Not with aggression. With ease. One hand. Perfect timing. Effortless control. The officer's entire body froze mid-kick, his balance shattered, his dignity evaporating into the marketplace air. Gasps broke out everywhere. "Oh my God! He caught it! He caught the kick like it was nothing! No way, that's unreal!" The officer's face drained of color. His body trembled. He was suspended in a moment he couldn't escape, physically or mentally. Stephen held his leg gently but firmly, preventing the officer from falling. For 3 long seconds, the officer and Stephen locked eyes. Stephen's expression wasn't angry. It wasn't mocking. It was disappointed. He spoke calmly, his voice cutting through the air like a lesson being delivered to a stubborn student. "Officer, strength isn't brutality. Power isn't meant for hurting people. Especially not the innocent." The officer swallowed hard, unable to speak. His breath caught in his throat. The reality hit him like a truck. The man he had been threatening was not someone to challenge, not someone to bully. Someone shouted from the crowd. He caught his leg like holding a broomstick. Another yelled. "Bro, his soul left his body." Phones shook as people zoomed in. This wasn't a movie, but it felt like one. Stephen gently lowered the officer's leg back to the ground, guiding it like he was helping a child regain balance. He didn't shove him. He didn't hurt him. He didn't retaliate. He simply let go. The officer staggered backward, nearly tripping again. Embarrassment washed over him like cold rain. His confidence collapsed in front of 100 recording eyes. He backed away, breathing fast. You, who are you?" he stammered. Stephen didn't answer. He didn't have to. The crowd answered for him. "That's Steven Seagal. The martial arts legend. He's trained Navy, CIA, everyone. You tried to kick Steven Seagal, bro." The officer's mouth hung open. He looked like a man waking from a nightmare, only to discover the nightmare was real. Real fear replaced anger. Realization replaced ego. Humiliation replaced power. Stephen didn't advance. He didn't threaten. He simply gave the officer space to breathe. "You should treat people with respect," Stephen said quietly. "Everyone deserves that." His words weren't just advice. They were a lifeline, a chance for the officer to reclaim some humanity. But the damage was done. The officer's hands shook. His eyes darted around nervously, meeting the phones capturing his downfall. His voice cracked as he tried to reassert authority. "Be back, backup's coming," he whispered. But the crowd didn't fear him anymore. They pitied him. Someone shouted, "Backup isn't here for him, it's here to save him." Another added, "He kicked the wrong man today." The officer stepped backward again, stumbling into a fruit crate. He didn't even notice apples rolling away from his boots. Stephen simply stood there, calm and unshaken, the image of controlled power, humility, and legendary composure. The marketplace had gone silent again. The officer had no idea what to do next. And he wasn't the only one. Because backup was already arriving. And when they recognized Stephen, the entire situation was about to flip upside down. Before the officer could regain even a shred of composure, the distant echo of police sirens swept through the marketplace. The crowd turned toward the street as 2 patrol cars rolled in, their lights flashing silently. People stepped aside, creating a path. The officer straightened his uniform quickly, trying to fix his appearance as if that would erase what just happened. His face was still pale. His hands still trembling. His pride still shattered. Backup officers stepped out, 2 younger officers and a senior sergeant. They hurried forward, hands resting near their belts, scanning the area for danger. "Officer Daniels," the sergeant barked. "We received your call. Where's the hostile suspect?" The crowd instantly burst into murmurs. "Hostile? You've got to be kidding. He was the one attacking. Oh, they're gonna know the truth real quick." Officer Daniels, the man who tried to kick Stephen, pointed shakily. He's right there. That's him." All 3 backup officers turned to look, and then froze. Their eyes widened. Their posture straightened. Recognition hit them like lightning. The senior sergeant blinked twice, stepped forward, and whispered harshly to Daniels. "Are you out of your mind?" "That's Steven Seagal." Daniels looked confused, embarrassed, furious, all at once. "What? Who?" he asked, still pretending not to know. One of the younger officers muttered under his breath, "How does he not know Steven Seagal?" Another whispered, "He literally tried to kick him? Bro, he's dead." The sergeant stepped toward Stephen immediately, not with hostility, but with respect. "Sir, Mr. Seagal, are you all right? Did he hurt you?" Stephen gave a humble nod, hands relaxed at his sides. "I'm fine. No harm done." The sergeant let out a breath of relief, not because Stephen needed protection, but because the situation could have escalated into something catastrophic. The crowd erupted. He didn't hurt him, Seagal saved him. That officer was completely out of control. We have the whole thing on video. Phones rose higher. Voices grew louder. The truth was undeniable. Officer Daniels tried to defend himself. He resisted. He refused orders. Someone shouted, "We have recordings. You were the one who attacked." Another added, "He treated that man like a punching bag until he found out who he was." The sergeant turned toward Daniels slowly, disappointment all over his face. "Daniels, tell me you didn't escalate a peaceful situation." Daniels swallowed hard. He looked suspicious. "I thought." "You thought what?" the sergeant snapped. "That you'd pick a fight with a civilian? That you'd abuse your badge in broad daylight? Or that you'd throw a high kick at a man who's been a martial artist longer than you've been alive?" Laughter broke out among the crowd, not mocking Stephen, but Daniels. Daniels' face flushed red as he looked at Stephen. You could have broken my leg." Stephen shook his head. "I didn't want to hurt you, officer." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Admiration, respect, disbelief. "He's a real master. Calm even under pressure. Daniels is lucky he's dealing with Seagal and not someone else." The sergeant turned to Stephen with genuine gratitude. Thank you for keeping this from becoming a bigger mess. Stephen nodded. Violence doesn't solve anything. Daniels scoffed. Easy for you to say. You're some star or whatever. The sergeant rounded on him. He's not some star. He spent decades teaching discipline, control, and restraint. Something you clearly don't understand. Daniels looked down, ashamed. The weight of his actions finally hit him. Everything he did, the shouting, the shoving, the threats, the attempted kick, was now captured by dozens of cameras and witnessed by hundreds of eyes. Daniels, the sergeant said, voice firm, hand me your badge. The marketplace fell silent. Daniels stared at him. Sergeant, please. Badge. Now. The officer's shoulders slumped. His hands shook as he unpinned the badge from his chest. He placed it in the sergeant's hand with a trembling breath. The crowd's murmurs grew sympathetic now. Humiliation was a harsh punishment, even if deserved. Stephen stepped forward. Everyone held their breath. Stephen raised a hand gently. Sergeant, don't end the man's career over a mistake. Daniels looked up, shocked. The sergeant raised an eyebrow. Sir, he attacked you without cause. Stephen nodded. Yes, but he can learn. Everyone deserves a chance to grow. The crowd whispered. He's too humble. Seagal is a better man than all of us. This is what real strength looks like. Daniel stared at Stephen, eyes red with shame and gratitude tangled together. Sir. I'm sorry, he finally said, voice cracking. I should have treated you with respect. Stephen placed a hand on the officer's shoulder, calm but firm. Then start now. Respect isn't about knowing someone's name, it's about seeing their humanity. Daniels nodded slowly. I understand. The sergeant hesitated, then sighed. Fine. Daniels, you're suspended pending review, but not dismissed. The crowd nodded in approval. It was fair. Balanced. The sergeant addressed everyone loudly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying calm. This will be handled appropriately. Stephen gave a small bow of gratitude to the onlookers. The sergeant turned to him. Mr. Seagal, thank you. Truly. But Stephen simply replied. Treat people well. That's all I ask. As the officers escorted Daniels away, the crowd watched quietly. The moment was powerful, human, humbling. And in the quiet aftermath, someone whispered, this man deserves the whole world's respect. And the videos were only just beginning to spread. By the time Steven Seagal left the marketplace, the videos had already begun spreading across social media. Dozens of angles, hundreds of witnesses, and thousands of comments exploded almost instantly. People weren't just shocked. They were speechless. One clip showed the officer screaming at Stephen. Another showed Stephen standing calm as a mountain. Another captured the exact moment the officer attempted the reckless high kick. And the most shared clip of all, the moment when Stephen gently, effortlessly, caught the officer's leg mid-air like he was catching a falling leaf. Within an hour, the hashtag Seagal stays calm began trending on every major platform. Comments poured in. This man is the definition of discipline. He didn't humiliate the cop, he saved him. Imagine trying to kick Steven Seagal. Nah bro. This should be shown in police academies. Respect matters. Footage spread from city to city, country to country. Newscasters discussed it. Reaction channels analyzed it. Martial arts experts broke down Steven's calm technique. Even comedians joked about the officer's kick form. But the part that resonated most wasn't the kick. It was Steven's humility. People replayed the moment he said, "Power isn't meant for hurting people." They replayed the moment he asked the sergeant not to ruin the officer's career. They replayed the quiet, powerful moment when Stephen placed a hand on the officer's shoulder and said, "Respect isn't about knowing someone's name, it's about seeing their humanity." Those words struck millions. Parents showed the video to their kids. Teachers discussed it with classrooms. Coaches played it during team meetings. The story wasn't just about a cop making a mistake. It was about what real strength looks like. Strength that doesn't brag. Strength that doesn't strike first. Strength that heals instead of hurts. By evening, major networks were calling Stephen for interviews. He accepted none. Instead, he posted a single message on his social media. Violence didn't win today. Respect did. That simple sentence gathered millions of likes in hours. Meanwhile, in the police department, Officer Daniels sat quietly in the break room, staring at the floor. The humiliation was still fresh, the lesson still raw. But for the first time in a long time, he reflected. He replayed his actions. He replayed Stephen's calm eyes. He replayed the moment Stephen could have destroyed his leg, but instead chose mercy. The sergeant approached him, placing a file on the table. "Daniels," he said sternly, "you messed up. But you also got lucky. Most people wouldn't have spared you." Daniels nodded slowly. "I know. I'm grateful he did. That man," the sergeant continued, "sets an example many officers should follow. You'd better learn from this if you want a future here." Daniels nodded again. And for the first time, he meant it. Across the city, Stephen walked home quietly, grocery bags still in hand. A couple of people recognized him on the street and offered smiles of admiration. But Stephen never slowed down. Fame didn't guide him. Ego didn't move him. He simply wanted his afternoon to continue in peace. When he finally reached his home, he paused at the door, looked at the sky, and whispered to himself, "Peace is the real victory." The next morning, major channels replayed the story. Steven Seagal handles confrontation with grace. Officer learns powerful lesson from martial arts legend. Marketplace incident becomes a global symbol of humility. And as millions of viewers watched the now iconic moment of Stephen catching the kick, the narrator in one channel said, "Some people use strength to intimidate. Some use it to inspire. Only a few use it to teach." By afternoon, one final viral message appeared beneath the videos. "If you believe no one should be judged by appearance, type respect." And the world typed it millions of times.